Hello and welcome, everyone. So nice for you all to be joining us. So today, the Association for Spiritual Integrity is pleased to have Miranda McPherson. I'll just speak a little bit about Miranda. Miranda has a wonderful, grace-filled presence. She's been teaching for over 3 decades. So she's going to bring forward great wisdom today, what she's learned in the past couple decades here. Miranda lives in the Bay Area. She's originally from Australia, and she teaches internationally, so teaches all around the world. Her key influences are Ramana Maharshi, Course in Miracles, The Diamond Approach. She has authored 3 books and runs Living Grace Sanghas. She works with groups in the U.S. and Europe and gives global reach online as well. Her latest book is The Way of Grace, The Transforming Power of Ego Relaxation. And so we're so happy to have Miranda today. Big thank you to all of you who offer donations to support this webcast and the work of the ASI. I will say this, a little plug for us. Keep those donations coming in. We do a lot of just blood and sweat and tears, put this program together and put the organization together. So any kind of financial contribution is greatly, greatly appreciated. So thank you all for past, present, and future donations to support this quality content that we try to bring each time we meet together. So a couple technical notes here. Pretty soon Miranda's going to start speaking, and then she's going to release us into groups, and then at the end she'll open it up for a Q&A process. So when you have a question at the end, if you raise your hand, and you can do that through the Zoom function at the bottom of the screen, there's a little place to click where you can raise your hand, and then Suzanne will call on you, when there's time to speak. And then you'll be speaking with Miranda, and Suzanne will take care of the muting and unmuting of your microphone. And just everyone be conscious, while we're on the webcast, don't be clicking around on the mute button and unmute yourself and have a barking dog in the background or, anything like that. So anyways, I think that's all the technical stuff. If I missed anything, forgive me as someone speak up. Please join me in really having a big, heartfelt welcome to Miranda McPherson. So pleased to have you today, Miranda. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's a great pleasure to be here and a real privilege to be the newest kid on the block at the ASI on board. So welcome, everyone. And I would really love for us just to settle consciously together into our time together today. So wherever you're listening to this, I invite you just to sit in a comfortable spot and to just focus on your breath for a moment. Just allowing your inhale to be regarded as a welcome to fully arrive, to come more present into your experience in the now. As if the breath is welcoming you deeper into your body, deeper into your heart, deeper into the now. And as if your own exhale is inviting any tension to just melt as naturally as ice will melt in the warmth of the sun. So just allowing unnecessary holding patterns that you're aware of to melt if they're ready to. Let other tasks and activities melt. So you naturally feel yourself landing more fully here into our theme today of embodying transparency in the teacher's seat. And feel yourself deepening in the heart, as if every breath opens up a little more space space for which you can get more in touch with your love for the truth, your love for the path, your love for your students or your clients or those whom you serve in some way. And in your own way, feel into your unity with everyone who's listening to this broadcast. Other people who care as you care about integrity, about co-creating a kinder and clearer and more compassionate culture for us and the generations who will come behind us to walk the path with depth and substance. And in your own way, open also to the grace of your teachers and their teachers and all the beings that have helped you on your path, that have brought you to where you are right now. All the love and dedication and embodiment of others on whose realization we journey. And feel yourself being here now in recognition and gratitude for all of that, strengthening our motivation to live into our potential as beautiful, graceful human beings, dedicated to bringing truth and goodness deeper into our world. So may our conversation together today be helpful and healing and useful to you and to us all. So I want to begin by really thanking you for being part of this brand new Association for Spiritual Integrity. And I hope you feel excited by what it is that we are co-creating together. I want to thank you for your willingness to participate in joining together with others who wish to raise the bar, let's put it frankly, and to help make walking the path, especially the spiritual path today, where so many of us are practicing beyond the confines and the structures of an organized religion, where we truly need one another to not fall so badly into the perils and the pitfalls of spiritual life, and instead find real support with one another in navigating the journey wisely. So it's in that spirit that I speak to you today about a subject that is very dear to my heart, and I'm sure it's dear to yours too. And that's, what does it mean to embody transparency in the teacher's seat? And when I say the teacher's seat, I mean not just, formal spiritual teaching, but in any kind of relationship in which we are serving someone. We are sharing our wisdom. We're giving our gifts. We are intending to help another to flourish and grow and evolve. And I know that many of us feel the need to evolve the paradigm itself of spiritual awakening and spiritual teaching. For so many years, a paradigm of the infallible guru has pervaded. And that has presumed that because a person has a very deep realization and a deep transmission and is exhibiting some very noble and beautiful qualities that inspire us, that by definition means that this person happens to be fully actualized in their realization. And I think it's important to recognize when we consider the fact that so many human beings have experienced great trauma in spiritual community and with spiritual teachers who have indeed had a pretty thunderous realization and transmission, how do we learn from what has happened collectively, and how do we create a new paradigm that serves to prevent needless suffering by making us more skillful and informed about some of the challenges and issues that can play into someone of a great realization seemingly coming so far off in their behavior in a way that causes great suffering for their students. I'm very interested in how we prevent that, but also how we harness the inevitable challenges of spiritual teachers also being human beings, using this as a way to grow and evolve in our spiritual community collectively. So where do we begin with this process? I personally think that it begins by starting to question the presumption that becomes because someone has a deep realization that must mean their realization is complete or completely integrated. Well, very rarely is it when we look from experience at how many thunderous beings have acted out in some painful way, either through power trips, through aggrandizement, through crossing, sexual boundaries inappropriately, through, taking advantage of their students in some way that has been devastating. I'm interested in how we can differentiate between the process of realization and actualization. To me, this is an important beginning point in unpacking how we can be more transparent in the teacher's seat, but at the same time sit deeply in our authentic realization and not diminish it. So when I've looked at this for myself, what I've noticed is that realization often happens in a moment. Maybe this has been the case for you too. When you're sincere and you show up for practice with real dedication over time, inevitably there are moments where the gates of consciousness open, and we don't really make them happen. They're like, Suzuki Roshi called them divine accidents. In fact, he said that spiritual practice, doesn't necessarily lead to enlightenment. It just makes you more accident prone. Well, I'm sure that's probably true in your experience too, because beautiful practices like self-inquiry or dedicated meditation or prayer, classical approaches to spiritual realization, they certainly refine our consciousness and they make us less thick and less dense, so we have more access to subtle dimensions. But we're also still human beings, and to be a human being means to have a personality. And in my own experience and observation of others whose realization I really respect, they also have a personality too. So I think we need to break down that presumption that because we have some realization, there's not also personality at play. And personality means that there are habits and tendencies that we have that have been developed through our earlier experiences, particularly in the first 5 years of life, and whatever cultural and religious background we might have come from. And so we can't pretend that these things aren't going to come into play. And as a teacher, we need to be interested in understanding our personality so that we're more awake to when its tendencies and hallmarks and characteristics start showing up when we're teaching, as inevitably is likely to be the case. So for myself, I found it very helpful to differentiate the process of realization, and by that I mean really understanding who we really are, understanding we're not our personality, we're not our gender, we're not really defined by any of our experiences. We have a personality, but we're not our personality, right? And obviously, realization is extremely important and is the platform for legitimacy in teaching. But the process of actualizing that realization through our psyche, through our nervous system, through the way we operate financially, sexually, interpersonally, and in every other way is an enormous process, and a process that usually takes a lot of time. So it's different from realization that can happen pretty suddenly or quickly. Actualization usually takes years, and it takes diligence, and it usually takes the support of other people with whom we allow to give us feedback, with whom we're willing to be vulnerable with whom we give permission to kindly tell us if there's something manifesting in our way of being that is less than skillful, so that we can look at it. So I think what also is an important thing when we look at what it is to embody transparency in the teacher seat is to acknowledge the complexity of our times and how that plays out when it comes to sharing truth in community. When you look at the model of satsang, which really comes from India, from the Eastern traditions, and it comes from a culture where everybody has a guru, it's part of the society, and where the guru often isn't expected to handle money, isn't expected to hold down a marriage or raise children or keep a job in the world in order to sustain themselves. When spiritual teachers here in the West, have to do all of those things usually. They have to sustain themselves financially. They have to interact with other personalities. They have to shop. They have to cook. They have to, deal with the nuances of relationship and family life. And let's face it, those are the areas where, our personality tendencies often come out the most. And so inevitably this brings a lot more complexity, not to mention the fact that in Western culture, particularly in America and England and Europe, it's so much more permissive. All of the rules of society have so changed in the last generation or two that unless we've had a chance to really take our time and explore how our realization wants to be lived when it comes to human sexuality and dealing with money and the fact of the pace and the speed of our modern culture, I think it's important to recognize that in this time, in this age, there's more complexity and it's harder to actualize and embody our realization than it's ever been, and that we need more support than we've ever had. Well, that's challenging because most of us these days, I'm sure you who are listening to this, are likely to be practicing your spiritual path at least kind of somewhat outside the boundaries of conventional religion. And while that gives tremendous freedom and scope to explore directly for yourself rather than having to go through intermediaries and uphold a certain belief system, at the same time, the shadow of that is that often there's no checks or balances. There's no elder, watching you and giving you feedback or inviting you to look at things. And often, we don't have somebody to talk to when something arises in us and we're not even quite sure what it is. But before we know it, it's being played out with our spiritual community. These are all issues that I've had 3 decades of stumbling around in and trying to find my way with and do my very best to learn and grow, both in my own deepening actualization process as well as ongoing realization. And I'm a big believer in not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and embracing all of our experiences and allowing them to become deeper wisdom. So one of the things that I see that's really important for us as well in this whole subject of becoming more transparent and deeper and more effective in our role as a spiritual teacher is to really understand that awakening is not a one-shot spiritual orgasm and then you're done. Again and again, I come across that presumption in many kinds of spiritual communities there's talk as if, they're enlightened, as if enlightenment is, reaching a particular spiritual summit, and then you're done with the muck and the mess of being human. Well, while I think it is true that there are certain levels of realization, and we all know it when we encounter a being whose embodiment is very clear and pure, and that's a tremendous gift to our world. At the same time, some of those same beings have said or done very questionable things. And so what I've seen, even in my contact with beings whose realization I have found exquisite and from whom I have benefited enormously, what has been very inspirational to see is even in those beings, I can see a continual evolution. For example, I remember, 15 years ago, when I was first spending time in Tiruvannamalai, I received so much from the silent darshan of a beautiful female saint whose name is Shiva Shakti Amaya. And when I first began to sit with her, she would transmit just in silence. And then over the years, she started to make more personal contact, and she eventually started to speak. And so what was fascinating for me in terms of learning about that is that no matter what our level of realization is, even if it's very refined, there's continual evolution that takes place. That's definitely true in my own experience, but I've noticed it to be true as I look at other great beings who are teaching as well. And when we really just take a look out the window and we contemplate Mother Nature, it's actually pretty obvious. True nature isn't static. It continues to unfold. And so if we accept that as the platform, that realization continues to refine and develop and expand, and that also in that process, sometimes we hit upon things within us that we didn't know were there. If we don't judge the arising of those seeming obstacles as proof that we're not realized, if we don't look at it from that black and white either or lens, if we look at it from a perspective of it being a continuum, and that whatever seeming shadow material or obstacles that might reveal themselves really present opportunities for a deeper refinement, more dimension, more depth of embodiment, realization, and actualization. And I find that helps us to be more honest with where we are in the spirit of continued learning and compassion and deep respect for the mystery of who we are as human beings. That includes both being inherently pure being, which is what we all really are, and simultaneously at the same time works in progress. So one of the things that has been helpful for me to really understand in terms of becoming more skillful when issues arise, but whether they're issues arising in me or issues arising in my student body, is understanding a phenomena of what's called idealization. And I think that a lot of what goes seemingly wrong in the spiritual teacher-student dynamic is confusion about the power of the role of idealization, both in terms of our ego development in our earlier life, and also how that plays out in spiritual community. So I'm going to kind of start with the human development part and then segue into how I see that's important for us to understand it as teachers. So you might remember when you were very little, a moment in your phase of development where you looked upon your mother or your father as a demigod, a god or a goddess. You might have suppressed these memories, but if you look deeply, you'll find that there was a time when you looked to them as if they were omniscient, as if they were perfect, and you loved them, and your devotion to your parents was full-bodied and immense. And this is very beautiful. And if you're perhaps a grandparent or you've spent time around little children and you've observed, that phase is usually kind of between 2 to 5, that kind of period of our development. And there's such a passionate love that we have for our mother or our father or both, sometimes one more than the other. And that we think that our parent is just the best. I remember being a little girl and eating a donut with another little girl when I was 5 years old and saying, my dad's the best. And she's going, no, my dad's the best. And I laugh, given, how much my father fell from grace soon after that period of my life. And, the idea that I could be having that conversation with someone is almost unfathomable, but we all do, and it's very important for us. It's a way that our young ego self leans into a bigger one as if they are omniscient, as a way to gather support for themselves. This is a process called idealization, and it's understood in depth psychology, and it's very important for us to respect the power of it. Inevitably, what happens for us all is that idealization breaks down when we begin to see that the one we've idealized, our parent, the god or the goddess, has feet of clay. And so in an ideal situation, the realization of the young part of ourselves, that the one we're idealizing is also a human being with learning curves and rough edges and things they're working out and learning and growing themselves, happens gradually. When it happens suddenly, through usually the parent behaving in a way that's very painful or scary or traumatizing, what it usually does is, creates a real problem, because it severs the felt sense that there's a bigger one that we can lean into who can support and nurture and guide us. And when that happens, we tend to trash that person. We think they're crap, we reject them, we split off the beautiful and the good and the noble and the loving and the supportive things that they have given us. And so it's a symptom of our maturity to be able to regard, those beings who we once had to look up to, in their totality, meaning to be able to acknowledge and respect them and appreciate who they are and what they give and their noble qualities, and also accept their humanity and not to have their humanity trash the fact that, they have some noble parts too. So what I see playing out very powerfully in the teacher-student relationship that causes a lot of confusion and problems is that we tend to transfer that idealization phenomena onto our spiritual teachers. And we do it particularly either at the beginning of our path or at stages of our path where we really do need a lot more guidance. We're in a very particular transition point. Like, for example, when we're first starting to really open substantially to non-dual awareness, and where a lot of our familiar identity is crumbling, we often have a greater need to lean into a teacher and to think of them as if they're completely stable, and to not also look at, places where they might not be. So often that can feed the not looking at red flags, or not being sufficiently discriminating, or presuming that our teacher is, by definition, completely integrated and stable in their realization when they might not be. And at the same time, if you are a teacher and you work with students ongoingly, it really serves you to understand this phenomena, because it impacts your skillfulness in terms of serving your students where they are with what they really need. For example, as a student, one of the things that I had to learn was that if I share too much personal information about my own process too soon, when a student really does need to idealize me, it confuses them. They can't handle the both and. They need to think of me as, that I don't kind of have an argument with my spouse, or that I don't struggle with anything. They need to think that for a little while before they can take in, well, everyone has conflicts interpersonally sometimes and needs to learn how to navigate that gracefully and intelligently and wisely. So I've had to really learn about this process of idealization, and also as a teacher to look at any attachment I might have to being idealized. And this is something that often isn't spoken of, that we might like that. But it's very important because it will help us when the idealization process is beginning to break down. And it needs to break down, but slowly and kindly and in a way that really serves our student. So then what happens is there can still be the necessary asymmetry that is usually required for an effective teacher-student relationship, but at the same time, a broader relationship that can hold more of both humanity and also can challenge the teacher or ask them questions that, otherwise would be a problem, and that the teacher can speak to that openly and honestly. So there's a lot more to say about this, but if you want to study more about this process of idealization, and I would really strongly recommend A.H. Almas's fantastic book, The Point of Existence, Transforming Realization, Narcissism into Realization, because he goes into this in a way that I found very helpful, and I think you probably will too. So another thing that I think is really important is to really understand what teaching actually is. One of the principles that I received very deeply from A Course in Miracles, which was a big part of my path in the early years, is the understanding that to teach is to demonstrate, and that you are always teaching in any moment. You're always teaching and you're always learning, and that teaching and learning are one in the truth. So, one of the things that was curious about my own path is that my spiritual teachers have asked me to teach kind of right off the bat. And so my time as a spiritual teacher started when I was 25 years old, which is kind of ridiculous now that I look back on it, but true. And my first spiritual teacher charged me with the task of creating and directing an interfaith training for interfaith ministers and spiritual counselors in England that hadn't existed before. And honestly, I didn't think it was going to amount to much, but I was wrong, and it caught fire very quickly. And, in those early years, so many times I felt quite out of my depth. And I was very grateful that I happened to be in good therapy at the time. And it turned out that most of my weekly therapy sessions, I was unpacking some of the things that I was feeling, my own feelings of failure and inadequacy mostly, to, do a good job of this. And I presumed that I was making a mess of it because often students would be getting reactive and challenging, and I was really sort of struggling to not take that personally, which felt like a big flaw of my character and was certainly an issue that I needed to work on. But I was really grateful when my therapist said that I could probably do with some specialist group dynamic supervision. So I took her advice, and I really was so grateful to gain the benefit of somebody who knew a lot more about facilitating groups than I did at the time, and was able to teach me how to recognize, when a student is in a different phase of development. They weren't coming from a spiritual perspective. They were looking at it more from a process-oriented psychotherapy approach. But nevertheless, it helped me to be able to differentiate my own, needs in the mix, to be thought well of, to do a good job, my own insecurity and identity issues, which I was working on anyway, and at the same time to be able to really understand and prioritize what my students needed and to serve them well at varying different stages and to recognize those stages. It was a big piece of learning. So I feel that I received a kind of crash course by being thrown into the deep end with a bunch of sharks in those first 10 years of my life as a teacher, and to learn the difference between when it serves to share personally what's going on for you and when that really doesn't serve. And mostly, how to keep my primary focus on what are the needs of my students, what serves them, and to be able to name things, but know when to hold back on sharing details, and when also to know some of my own reactivities getting triggered, some of the things I need to go away and take to, take a deeper lens to, and be humble enough to explore that so that I keep learning and growing. So that was really the first decade of my teaching career, and there was a lot of learning, a lot of growing, a lot of stumbling that happened, and I am very grateful for the patience of my students at that time, of really what was a young spiritual teacher who just was scrambling to do a decent job. But then in my second decade of teaching, obviously things were more refined, and my own realization process was quite a different level by then as well. And so I remember a moment, and I was running with Lama Polden and Sherry Anderson, a program called the Feminine Wisdom School. And I remember teaching a retreat one weekend, and, someone said something in the group that wasn't, that was challenging. And I responded to it, and technically what I said wasn't bad, but I recognized after the fact that it had an edge to it energetically. And for anybody who was sensitive in the room, that would have been felt. And so it was an interesting moment. I felt myself in that moment, like, do I just sort of let that pass, or do I say something? And I made the choice to say something. So here's what I said. I said something really kind of straightforward, like, if you notice an edge coming out of me in what I just said to this person, I apologize for the impact of that. And I realize now that was just sort of hitting on something in me, that I'm aware of what that is. It's got nothing to do with you. So I'm sorry if my impact was not good on you. And would anyone like to say anything about that? Well, I just said it plainly because it was a fact. I didn't go into the details of what it was within me that had gotten triggered. I just named that is what happened and that that's my material. And what came back was really interesting, was very powerful. Everyone was kind of in shock. Like, we have never seen a spiritual teacher say or demonstrate that before. And I'm curious about this, thinking, well, why not? To me, it's obvious, it's true, and it's better if it's named. But that feedback kind of encouraged me to see that this is actually very important. In the same way, it's important if you're a parent to acknowledge if you've acted in a way that has had your own frustration and difficulty in it, that is not really about the child. It's healing for them to see you apologize. It's helpful to have repair modeled. It's helpful to get a demonstration of the fact that we can make mistakes and we can do what we can do to clean up our effect, to be interested in our impact on other, and to acknowledge and give them space to share their experience. So to me, this is, spiritual integrity 101, but it's rare that it happens. And I really hope that as we continue to create community together, that we can start to model some of these things so they can become more commonplace, because it helps us to feel safe. So coming to the third decade of my teaching life, which is where I'm at now, something happened last year in the teacher's seat, and I had a student who had a tendency to kind of not really follow the instructions that I give that are very precise when we go into inquiries, particularly the deeper inquiries that are asking us to go towards very personal and very vulnerable things and bring them to the light in inquiry. So I'm always very clear when we do such work that it's extremely important not to comment on another's experience. Because if you do, you just pull them into conversation and it takes them off the point of inquiry, which is to really journey into yourself. And so I had noticed that this particular student, had a tendency to comment, even though I've always been very explicit about the reasons why that's not what I'm asking. And so we were going into an advanced inquiry one day, and I was giving the inquiry and the instruction, and I singled this person out, and I said, especially you, and I named them. Well, the minute I said that, I realized, that wasn't good. That was not skillful. That was likely to really be humiliating. That would best have been done by taking that person aside and having a private conversation with them and inviting them to look at, why they do this, why they, don't actually follow my very explicit instructions, even though I've explained the reason why. So the exercise went on. I could tell that this particular student was enraged at me. I understood why. That was pretty normal reaction considering. And so when it came back to the questions and answer portion, it was wonderful. He actually, took that enragement and worked through it in the inquiry practice. But when we came back, I knew it was going to be important for me to acknowledge what had happened to the whole group and also to him, and to check in about it. And so again, I just said, look, I want to acknowledge that probably hit you really hard, and it really would have been better if I had talked to you privately about this, and I didn't do that, and I'm really sorry. And he was then able to share how it was for him. The whole thing was kind of clear within under 5 minutes. And then we opened it up to the group. And again, the group, dropped to a whole other level of trust. And what they reported was feeling a lot safer, feeling they could trust me more, feeling they could trust the group more. Because again, we could make mistakes. We could acknowledge those mistakes. We could learn from that. We could harness it, and we could grow in safety and truth and wisdom together. And that isn't the first time that's happened. But of course, what it also asks for me as the teacher, to do some further inquiry, to understand the forces. Why did that happen in the first place? And so what I saw about myself is, well, yes, of course, my personality tendency is not to confront. That's just my personality. And so there it was, slipping out of me sideways in the moment. And so it's good to keep an eye on that material, and is a reason, I think, why, if you're going to take up the role of teacher, whether you intended to or whether it's just what ended up happening in your life, which is the case with me, that you make sure you set up structures and relationships in your life where you can, look at such things, not just look at them superficially, to really understand, why did that happen? What are the forces that drove me to be unskillful? Not just that I can repair them, but to grow in our integration so that we are less and less and less likely to just enact from our personality. But that when it does happen, we can repair and deal with it and harness it as an opportunity to grow beyond just the paradigm of someone's either enlightened or they're not. They're either perfect or they're not. We can be with the both and of being pure being and continuing to learn and evolve and grow personally, collectively. So I think it's really important that we just don't pretend that we're immune from things slipping out of us sideways. And, again, to stay humble as we continue to deepen and serve and grow. And that inevitably is going to involve being curious about the tiny little things that bump you off your center, as well as the bigger things. So that really leads me into where I want to go now, which is for us to do some exploration together. Now, here we are at the Association for Spiritual Integrity. We all love the truth. We all want to raise the bar. So let's help one another with that right now. So I designed a little inquiry sequence for us to do together, and Suzanne will put you in pairs in a moment. But first, let me describe the inquiry process that I want us to do, and so that that's all clear. It's three questions that we'll do as a triple repeating question sequence. So that means that one partner asks the other partner these three questions. So if I was your partner, I would ask you the first question, and it's this: tell me something that bumps you off your center. And if you're a teacher, you can add as a teacher. Tell me something that bumps you off your center as a teacher. So when the question comes in, don't try and think about it too much. Just let the question penetrate you. So you might respond to this with, I don't know, but I'm feeling this kind of quivery feeling in my tummy, and as I feel it, I kind of feel a little bit ashamed. To which your partner will say only, thank you. And then they will give you the next question, which is designed to take whatever you've said a little bit further and tease more out of it. So the next question is, what's at the core of this? So you might let that question in, and you might begin with, I don't really know, but I'm getting a memory of when I was 7 and I was humiliated at school, or, you know, a memory might come up, a sensation might come up, a feeling might come up, something you were told from your parents or your teacher, or some rule you absorbed might come up, or something you just know about yourself might come up, or something you hadn't quite realized might come up. So your partner gives you the first question, tell me something that bumps you off your center as a teacher. You respond, they say thank you. They give you the next question, what's at the core of this? You say something, they say thank you. They give you the third question, opening your heart to your own humanity. What's the invitation here? And so just see what bubbles up in response to that question. They say thank you, and then you switch, and then you will ask them those three questions, saying thank you to whatever they say, and then they ask you those three questions. You ask them those three questions. They ask you those three questions. And so we journey together, looping with those three questions. Okay? I hope that makes sense. And if you're listening to this after the fact, you're not listening live, then what I would suggest is either getting together with a friend you trust and doing this inquiry for at least 20 minutes, but longer is better, or else putting a timer on and journaling. And here's a little tip. Often what happens with inquiry is you get to a certain point in the inquiry and you think, okay, I've said everything I have to say. Let's just have a conversation, or let's stop. Well, here's a little secret. Real inquiry begins where you get to that point where you think you've said it all and you don't think you have anything more to say. That's the point where things get juicy. So I'm telling you that ahead of time, so you give yourself the opportunity to just see what happens within these 20 minutes. And I very much look forward to coming back and seeing what happened for you and what we can learn together. So let's go into the breakout inquiry now, shall we? Suzanne, you can lead the way. So I'm very curious to hear what happened for you in that inquiry, and also how you were affected by the teaching that I shared today. And I'm really welcoming any questions and also any insights you've had. So please raise your hand if you'd like to speak or share something or ask anything. Richard, I can see it, wants to say something.
Yeah, let's do Richard. So Richard's going to start with the first question. Richard, I will unmute your mic.
Hey there, everyone, and thank you so much, Miranda, for this really wonderful presentation. I don't so much have a question, just I think a quick comment that those dyads are hugely powerful to be in an interpersonal space and field. There's such a different quality sharing those things and moving into that process than doing it alone, which I think I'm often doing. And then, the last thing that I want to comment on real quick is I just can't get enough of spiritual teachers, regardless of their level of realization, also being human beings with their vulnerabilities and learning to handle that skillfully. I come from a counseling background where we go through an extensive education and touch on these things. And the person I was just with was just saying, like, a lot of us spiritual teachers, we plop into this because it's a calling and yet don't have this education in regards to the interpersonal aspect and the group dynamics that you were just speaking to. And I see the ASI as a huge start to that. So just thank you. Thank you for your transparency and vulnerability sharing. It was incredible and empowering.
Good, thank you. I'm glad it was meaningful. And my encouragement to work with those questions, give it a lot more time. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question will be from Anne. And Anne, welcome. You're trying to unmute your mic, but
okay,
there
hi.
you are.
It's Annie.
Hi,
Annie.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you and great to see everybody. I just want to say, first of all, I don't so much have a question, but I love the idea of this kind of community because as a facilitator and teacher, I often feel like I'm alone and, at least in terms of, present human beings and other teachers. And so just having a community that's concerned about this is really valuable. So just being part of this conversation really feels great. And I really, one of the things I love about your teaching, Miranda, is your vulnerability and the way your own transparency. It's one of the things that makes me sign up with you.
I'm glad.
And so, and of course, you model that so well, and that helps. I think as I work with your work and as I've learned your way, I find that I'm much more comfortable about opening up, being transparent with people. I feel more grounded and secure about it. I don't, I'm not going to fall off. I'm not going to fall off the cliff. And so that's really a gift, a really great gift.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad to hear it. And it takes, taking that risk, that for us to start getting it, that nothing bad's going to happen by getting real, by being humble and being real and actually starting to embrace the beauty of being in touch with ourselves, even if what we discover is that we might not be as far along as we thought we were. Once we get clearer on where we actually are and what our invitations are, where we're being asked to learn something or let go of something or become more flexible somewhere, then we have more precision in our practice that actually does propel us further and deeper along our path, and that brings true satisfaction and fulfillment as well as blessings for other people. So it's all good.
And then there's that wonderful surprise about what, as you mentioned, about what it can open up that you didn't necessarily anticipate or strategize, but it's lovely.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question let's have from Eva. Eva, I'm trying to unmute you again. It looks like there you are.
Okay. Miranda, thank you so much. I found this amazing, this practice, and especially repeating it because you go into deeper levels of the consideration, and I found it very, very powerful. Thank you so much. And what it brought up in me was the desire to have like something that's more like ongoing, like a universal teachers practice course, integrity practice course, that meets regularly and practices regularly on that level. That would be an amazing support, because I felt like for so long that there's nobody who does what I do, and it's scary. What if I can't do it? What if I can't do it right? What if I get lost in some stuff that I don't see? And so it's just, I would just love that, if we had something ongoing that's where we support one another in a universal.
Well, in between now and whenever that ongoing, support structure arrives, here's what I suggest you do: is reach out to somebody on this program who feels like you do, and create a weekly, session where maybe you work with this line of inquiry for half an hour. And, you just do the inquiry, and then you have some kind of discussion together afterwards. It can be like an integrity inquiry date once a week. All you need is one other person, who loves what you are. Why not? Empower yourself. Take that action now.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
That's a big part of the way I actually invite all of my students, is to actually have some kind of inquiry or practice buddy that they're accountable to. And these are things that we can do right now, especially now that we are not alone in this moment. There are other people who care about this and are serving and growing and learning and have that paradigm. So take it upon yourself.
Okay, anyone here? I'm ready. If anyone wants to join me,
Good.
Come and get in touch with me.
Good. I'm sure they will. Maybe the person that you did inquiry with would be an obvious choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's the whole point of the ASI, is we're wanting to collaborate together and develop these relationships. Okay, so let's now have a question from Erica. Erica, I'm going to release your mic.
Okay, how's that?
Hi, Erica.
Yeah, there you are.
Oh, hello. Hi, Miranda. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, when you talk about knowing when to share personal details, and obviously we want to make sure the sharing is done with the intention of helping the student. And sometimes I find myself, when I'm in various leadership positions, I'll start a story and then I'll get that, after I start the story, I can tell whether it's appropriate or not. Any advice on how we can tell earlier?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I think it's more about, I can just share what I do, which is I feel into my students or who I'm going to be with. I feel into the group. And, where are they? What do they need? What does support look like for them right now? Sometimes what support is encouragement. So a lot of the reason why we might tell a personal story about perhaps how it was for us when we were going through a particular transition point that's relevant to a transition point that you might feel that they're at is, to encourage them. It's okay. Hang in there. And to tease out some of the nuances involved in such a transition process. For example, a transition process of, truly letting your sense of, relating to yourself as through your work or through your relationships dissolve and just being nothing and nobody. That takes some spiritual cojones, as we all know, right? It sounds easy, but when, we're really relaxing into not being a somebody, it's a pretty big deal, right? On the way in. Once it's happened, it's like, well, of course, what were we worried about, right? So I think it's just keeping uppermost in your heart and in your mind, what do they need and what serves? Do they need encouragement? And if so, what kind, right? What is it that they are really struggling with? And to ask more questions than you share stories is always a good rule of thumb. And the more you ask questions about the nuances of their experience, the more that clarifies where they really are and what their needs really are. And then it just flows more naturally what to share and how much to share.
Wonderful.
Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
And also understanding your own personality style. Like if it's your style to kind of overshare and you know that about yourself, then it's probably a good rule of thumb to back off a little. Yeah. And conversely, the reverse, if your personality style is to withhold a lot of personal details and not give away very much, it would probably serve to stretch a little in that direction and just see how that goes.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we might have time for one more question here. How about Annie?
Can you hear me? All right. I don't see Miranda, though.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are, the lovely Miranda. Hello. So I just want to tell you I love the process and I love what you're sharing. I lived for many years in an ashram, so I'm breaking out of a certain model with great love and respect for my time there.
Yeah.
Understanding of things. But I'm a yoga teacher of many, many years, but I also sub in the school system.
Okay.
So it's a very different population. So teaching yoga students is usually lovely. But, when you're with kids, it's a whole different thing. And yesterday I had a very interesting experience that I noticed you mentioned when you were speaking, and that is I walked into the classroom. I had walked out for 2 minutes. I was with high schoolers. I walked back in, and part of the ceiling had come down. And these kids were up on the desk. And I thought it was hijinks. I thought that they just were being kind of delinquent. And I immediately just spoke very sternly to them. And I said, you shouldn't act this way. And I read them the riot act. And I found out subsequently that actually they were trying to fix the ceiling and it had caved down. And I immediately knew that I had to apologize.
Wow.
Look, I'm really sorry. I misunderstood the situation. I had a previous class that was very difficult. I didn't tell them that. But I have projected that last experience onto them. And it completely changed the tenor in the room.
Yeah.
But I'm just so happy I had the wherewithal in that moment to apologize because you could see their faces lighting up.
Yeah.
The atmosphere in the room completely. So I just wanted to share that little.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And thank you for modeling. Yeah, we make mistakes and how you correct mistakes, and it's no big deal to, be a human being, you be in a learning curve, misread the situation, react emotionally or react in a way that isn't skillful, and then put it right. And it's very humanizing. It's an important teaching. If more of us knew how to acknowledge error and repair, this would be a very different world. Yeah.
Miranda, did you want to do one more question?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do, I'm probably going to butcher this name as well. Is it Kaya Bassing? I'll unmute you now.
Great. It's Clea. Thank you.
Clea.
Sorry, it's getting really dark here.
No problem. I can see your face. Hi, Clea.
Hi. Thanks for doing this. I've just been contemplating for myself in the moment where I realize I've said or done something unskillful as I'm teaching, but there's like too much contraction for me to think clearly about, what would be helpful here for the students. The best I've come up with in my mind is being able to say, something didn't feel good about what I just said. I'm going to contemplate that.
So let me ask you a question. Do you have an elder, a mentor, a teacher that you can, after the fact, go and unpack that, with and really kind of get to the bottom of what is that in you? Right
now, more peers, but I do have people I go to for a very specific program for which I teach, but yeah.
Well, my encouragement to you would be to really bring a sharper, deeper curiosity to that, it sounds like there's something that emerges out of you that you yourself don't fully understand.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so if we refuse to judge that, right, we refuse. And instead we go, let me understand that. Let me understand this part of myself. What are the driving forces within that happening? Who am I when that happens? Do I have an age when that comes out of me?
Right. So all of that feels very doable and lovely and necessary.
Good.
It's just in the moment when something happens, and for whatever reason, there's.
So let me give you something very simple and practical. It's so simple, it's deceptive. It goes like this. Bring your awareness right down to your feet. Wiggle your toes. Literally, bring your attention right down into the felt sense of your feet on the floor and the contact with the ground. And bring your awareness to your legs and your pelvis and your belly. Just take some deep breaths into your belly and really just give yourself some breaths and just sensing the ground. What that will do is it'll help to ground and center you so that you have more capacity to come to your heart and to take action that is more open. You can't really do that if you're just sort of caught in if you're sort of energetically ungrounded, right? So give yourself the opportunity to take some breaths. It's okay. Really, it's okay. Just slow it right down in that moment if you can. And take the pressure off yourself to have to be perfect. Right? In the same way that I'm sure you would say to your students on the mat, when their bodies just really find a certain posture very hard, you go as far into the posture as you can and you just softly, patiently breathe. Right? That's all that's needed, is to be honest and to do our best and to be curious what supports us, to be more present and to be more awake to ourselves. And it's likely to be a practice to be able to say, almost as soon as it's come out of your mouth. I mean, I demonstrated that, but you've got to remember I've been teaching for 3 decades. So, that doesn't come quickly. Right? Catching yourself in the act and be able to correct and repair quickly is something that gets easier as we learn more about ourselves and we learn what we really need to, actualize our realization and our noble qualities in the moment as things are happening. That's kind of the advanced course. So kindness to yourself in the process of this is absolutely paramount.
Excellent. Yeah, giving the space for grounding. I think it's been a little bit lacking. I think I have to respond more quickly than that, so I appreciate it.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's stuck around for the inquiry, who did the inquiry. And, I would encourage you to keep these 3 lines of inquiry close to your heart because, doing it for 20 minutes is just the beginning. And those 3 questions can really take you far. And it might be something that you might want to practice once a week with one another, or if you can't, journal them. But it's always going to be helpful to join together with someone else in this kind of process because things will come out of you that are a surprise. So my encouragement to stay with it and just to stay with us as we continue to learn and grow at the ASI and learn what structures are needed to support our growing community and that we're in it together. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Miranda. As you can see, there's a lot of gratitude being shown symbolically from people here. I have one question. I want to know if those who are here now, if you're interested in doing a phase 2 where we dive deeper into the same thing with Miranda, like a series 2 of this very same thing in the same format. Okay, we have more nods than shakes. Okay, let's talk about that further, Miranda, at another time, and we'll see if we can offer that.
Sure.
Great. Miranda, on behalf of the ASI, of which you're on the board, so I feel like I'm like talking to myself a little bit. Thank you so much for not only just creating a beautiful space, as you always do, for being so open and vulnerable and honest about yourself, and also for giving us tools in addition to all that space. It's the tools that you leave us with, which is just so generous from your own heart. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I have two other things to say. One is, please mark in your diaries February 26th. February 26th at the same time is the next ASI group meeting. It will be co-presented by Mariana Kaplan and Roger Walsh, both of which are...
That'll be a hot ticket.
Both which are spearheading transpersonal psychology. And I know I'm playing them down by saying that. They are ahead of the game in terms of marrying psychology and spirituality. It'll be a gem worth coming to. Again, we're going to do it for free and do it on a donation basis. That's on 2/26. The topic itself will come in the next few weeks. It's a save the date for now. The second thing is, if you want to know about Miranda and her own work, it's mirandamcpherson.com. if you want to pursue her personally in any way. Finally, if you haven't already, please donate if this was of value to you, because this organization is by peers, for peers, and it's about us contributing to it to make it work. More than your presence, we need funds also to pay for admin support and all the associated fees.
And just so you know, teachers like myself, we're donating our time. So anything you donate just goes to the needs to develop programs and run the administration. That's all. So,
yeah, that's it. There's no money changing hands in any way except paying for essential administrative support. Thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting each other. And I'm so happy that the times, they are changing. See you in 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
See you in 6 weeks. Bye-bye for now.